I crushed the hopes of a young man in Canada and made American men look terrible. TLDR at the bottom. This is a story of the meanest thing I may have ever said to a person. My buddy was getting married and decided to have a bachelor party. We choose a festival in Montreal called Osheaga for the destination. I did what a best bro would do and listened to all the artists who were playing. I created a Spotify playlist of all their best songs for the brothers, then I set up a stage schedule as a baseline, just for funsies, for each day. Basically, because I researched it so much I became a mini festival guide, so whenever we were all hanging out at a base, people would be like, where to next? Now, 13 of us went. There was almost 0 times we were all together outside of the headliners, but then magic happened. We all ended up in the same spot on day 3 midday. With everyone present they all were like, okay Mag, where are we heading? Lead the way. And I started to beeline to a stage we had to get to in order to see the band on time. Small tangent, this festival had giant balloons that floated over the porta potties, so if you needed to go to the bathroom you can just look to the sky and see balloons to find them. So as we were walking, a young man comes up to me and goes, "Yo man. I'm just a kid, looking for a squat." I said, "What?" He mumbled again sounding high, "I'm just a kid looking for a squat." Leading this entourage and annoyed by the interruption, I looked him square in the eyes with a face full of agitation and said, "Dude, you can go take a shit, over there," and I pointed forcefully to the balloons nearby. Bro's face looked like his soul just cracked in half and he walked away, crestfallen, into the crowd. My buddy then ran up to me and said, "Dude, what the fuck did you say to that guy?" I looked at him and said, "What?" He came up to me and asked where he could take a squat, so I said, "You can go take a shit over there," and pointed at the balloons again. My friend looked at me with shock in his eyes and said, "No dude," he said, "I'm just a squid looking for a squad." A squad is the scientific term for a group of squid. Realization dawned on me. This young man, a fellow brother from Canada, probably a super chill dude, was bold enough to ask to join our group because he was solo at the concert. Something I have a lot of respect for, is doing something like that isn't easy for a lot of people. And when he approached an entourage of American men to ask if he could join, I told him he could go take a shit over there. I'm sorry my guy, if you are out there reading this, please know I would love if you would join our crew and I'll buy your drinks the rest of the night too. You are welcome in our squad, always. TL, Dr. Solo concert goer asked if he could join our crew. I misunderstood what he said and told him he could go take a shit over there. I'm really bummed about it still. Let me analyze this story for you. The story opens with a title that blends personal shame and cultural guilt in a self-deprecating way. I crushed the hopes of a young man in Canada and made American men look terrible. This sets the tone, a light-hearted confession with underlying remorse. It immediately signals to the reader that what follows is an exploration of a misstep, not a boast or a humble brag, but a sincere reflection on a moment that left a deeper impression than expected. The tone is comedic, but the emotional stakes are real. The story begins by placing us in a celebratory context, a bachelor party in Montreal at the Osheaga Music Festival. The narrator's role as the best bro is established quickly, showing initiative, consideration, and enthusiasm by curating a playlist and organizing a stage schedule. This builds an image of someone responsible, attentive, and slightly type A in a fun way. It's a setup for contrast, someone who planned so much, yet couldn't see the twist coming. The detail of creating a schedule just for funsies also adds warmth and personality. It paints the narrator as well-meaning and passionate about making the event enjoyable for others. As the party progresses, we learn about the group dynamic, 13 men rarely in the same place at once, except during headliners. This is important context. It sets up the rare, special moment of unity. Magic happened when they're all together midday on day 3. When everyone looks to the narrator to lead, it positions him with a bit of festival authority. He's not just one of the brothers now, he's the unofficial guide. This heightens the tension. What follows will be a moment where his leadership is interrupted, and how he handles it matters. Then comes the approach. A young man steps out of the crowd and says something cryptic. "I'm just a kid looking for a squat." This is the pivotal moment. The narrator, caught off guard and distracted by the weight of leading a group, mishears the phrase. His irritation bubbles up, and in a blunt, curt reply, he gestures toward the porta potties and says, "Dude, you can go take a shit, over there." The line lands like a punch in the gut for the young man. The description, "his soul just cracked in half," is vivid and theatrical but rings emotionally true. You can feel the narrator realizing something is wrong, even if he doesn't quite know what yet. The real twist comes when a friend runs up and delivers the shocking correction. The guy didn't say he needed a squat, He said he was a squid looking for a squad, a weird, poetic, goofy, vulnerable, beautiful way of saying, "Can I hang with you guys?" This twist is perfect. It retroactively transforms the entire situation. What first seemed like a confusing encounter becomes a missed connection of immense emotional weight. The reader instantly reinterprets everything and shares in the narrator's horror and remorse. The next paragraph delivers the gut punch of empathy. The narrator reflects not only on what was said, but on what it meant. The stranger, a solo concertgoer, approached a group of strangers with open-hearted boldness. He made a quirky, creative overture, one that required courage. The narrator acknowledges how hard that must have been. It's not just about the misunderstanding now, it's about the deep, accidental rejection of someone trying to connect. The emotion shifts from laughter to aching guilt. The juxtaposition of American brashness and Canadian friendliness adds a cultural layer, but it's secondary to the human one. In the final section, the narrator does what makes this story land so well. He offers a heartfelt apology. It's sincere, humble, and deeply self-aware. "Please know I would love if you would join our crew and I'll buy your drinks the rest of the night." It's more than an apology, it's a wish to undo the moment. A desire to reach through time and correct the damage done. The emotional arc is clear. It begins as a funny bachelor party anecdote, turns into a surreal misunderstanding, and ends with genuine remorse for having, unintentionally, crushed someone's hopeful spirit. Themes and structure. Miscommunication and human vulnerability. The core of the story is a misheard phrase, but what gives it weight is the narrator's recognition of the emotional risk the young man took. A funny misunderstanding becomes a tragedy of social courage being rejected. The burden of leadership. The narrator is in a position of social responsibility in that moment. His focus on managing his group ironically blinds him to someone reaching out. It's a quiet commentary on how being in charge, even casually, can make us less present. The long tale of regret. What elevates this story is that the narrator still thinks about this moment. It didn't pass as a quick oops. It haunts him. That's what makes it a compelling story. It lives rent-free in his head and heart. Self-reflection without self-pity. The narrator never wallows, but he owns his mistake. He's not asking for forgiveness from the reader, he's offering it to the young man. That gives the apology more power. Humor as a Trojan horse. The comedic elements, the absurd misunderstanding, the porta-potty balloons, the phrase "squid looking for a squad" make the story palatable and entertaining, but they also lull the reader into a false sense of security before the emotional depth hits. Why it works so well. This story captures a perfect blend of comedy, cringe, empathy, and moral growth. It's about a moment, a brief interaction, but it reflects something much larger: how we treat strangers, how we lead in groups, and how one misunderstood sentence can become a memory that lingers forever. It's also a rare kind of villain story, where the villain is the narrator, but in the most human, fallible, and forgivable way. You root for him to get redemption, even if he can't. Because we've all been there, said the wrong thing, missed the signal, shut someone down without realizing it. And the fact that he wrote this story, with humility, humor, and a hope that maybe that guy will see it someday? That's the redemption. Just found out at 34 that my dad isn't my biological father. Trying to hold everything together. I am a 34 DM, and yesterday I found out something that completely shook me. The man who raised me, who I've always known as my dad, isn't my biological father. I came across a newspaper archive from 1998 that mentioned my dad's name and an adoption in the legal classified section. I asked my mom, and she confirmed it. The man who's been my father in every way adopted me when I was around 7. He came into my life when I was a year old, after my mom had left my biological father. Here's where it gets a little heavier. My mom married my biological father when she was 16. He was twice her age. He was manipulative, violent, and a drug user. She had me at 18 and left him shortly after. He's now dead. I don't know how, or when, or what kind of health issues ran in his side of the family. That part scares me, because my whole life I thought I shared DNA with the man who raised me, and now I don't even know my medical history. This morning, my mom called my dad, they're divorced now, crying hysterically, because she felt guilty for telling me and worried about how I was handling it. My dad was furious. He hung up on her and said he wished she had talked to him first. He told me he never wanted me to know because he was trying to protect me and he knew it would open a can of worms emotionally, and he wasn't wrong. He told me he wants nothing more to do with her. He said he's done answering her calls, and I believe him. But he also told me something I'll never forget. None of this changes anything between us. I wanted a family. I wouldn't change anything. We talked. We're okay. I told him I didn't blame anyone. I've calmed down a lot since that conversation. But still, this is a lot. I feel like I sorta lost a part of my identity. I'll admit, I'm sad. Not because of how he raised me, but because I used to believe I inherited things from him. That I'd age like him. Look like him. Maybe I still will. People always said we looked alike. Same humor. Same blood type. Same hobbies. But now I don't know what's real and what I wanted to be true. He dedicated his entire life to raising me. He chose me. He stayed in my life even after divorce. He showed up for everything. I've never known anything but his love and care. His own side of the family doesn't even know and believes he is the biological father. I guess I just want to know if anyone else gone through this? How did you deal with it? Did it ever stop occupying space in your head? Were you able to get back to that sense of emotional peace where it doesn't matter anymore? I'm not mad. I'm just carrying something heavy that I never asked for. And I don't know how to put it down yet. Update: I may not respond to every comment right away, but please know that over the next couple of days I'll continue reading each and every one of your comments. Thank you for all the support and comments. It's still an emotional time for me, but reading all of your comments helps. Also, to clarify, I was an emotional kid and I do believe that they didn't tell me to protect me. If I had known when I was at a vulnerable age when I was going through a lot of mental health issues, I might have done something that could never come back from. I initially brought up the newspaper archive to Mom and read what it said, but I only wanted to ask her if she was married before my dad because it had the guy's name on it. She assumed I wanted to know if my dad was my actual dad or not. I do understand why both sides did what they did. I still wish I didn't know about it, but that's my own fault for wanting to be nosy. I know I shouldn't blame myself, but it's hard not to. Lastly, I did as many of you suggested and I told my dad how much he means to me. We both cried together. Thanks again, Redditors. Let me analyze this story for you. This story is a deeply affecting exploration of identity, familial love, and the unexpected emotional weight of truth. The narrator, a 34-year-old man, is thrown into emotional upheaval after stumbling upon a seemingly innocuous piece of information, a newspaper legal notice about an adoption from 1998. What begins as casual curiosity quickly snowballs into a life-altering revelation: the man he has always called dad is not his biological father. At first glance, the story seems rooted in a single moment of shock. But beneath that surface lies a layered emotional journey, one that weaves together the pain of discovering a buried truth, the gratitude for unconditional love, the mourning of a fictionalized origin, and the confusion that comes when the version of ourselves we've lived with is suddenly called into question. The emotional whiplash is immediate. When the narrator confronts his mother, she confirms what the archive implied: he was adopted at age 7 by the man he has always known as his father. This moment alone carries massive emotional weight, not just because of what it reveals, but because of how it recontextualizes decades of life and memory. He learns that his biological father was twice his mother's age, a man who was abusive, addicted, and unfit, the kind of man whose presence looms large even in absence. His mother's story is one of survival, pregnant at 18, married far too young, and strong enough to leave a dangerous man and seek a better life for her child. In this light, her decision to withhold the truth isn't framed as malicious or selfish, but protective. Still, knowing this doesn't make the emotional impact any lighter for the narrator. It complicates things further. She was trying to shield him from a painful reality, but in doing so, she also withheld a piece of who he is, medically, historically, personally. His reaction is not one of rage, but of loss. That's what makes the story so poignant. He isn't angry at his parents. He isn't yelling or accusing. What he expresses is something more difficult to articulate: the quiet grief of losing an imagined inheritance. He had spent his whole life believing he would age like his father, that they shared a bloodline, a health history, a set of biological fingerprints. People told him they looked alike, that they had the same blood type, the same humor. In his mind, these commonalities were evidence of a deeper bond. And they still are, but now he realizes they were rooted not in biology, but in shared experience, shared presence, and years of emotional closeness. That realization is beautiful, but also a little heartbreaking. He didn't lose the love of his father, but he lost the illusion that it was something more, that he was the product of that man in every way. And yet, the adoptive father's reaction is the emotional cornerstone of the story. His response is not one of regret or detachment, but of love so resolute it seems to defy the disruption. None of this changes anything between us. I wanted a family. I wouldn't change anything. These words are simple, but they land with incredible emotional resonance. They are an affirmation of chosen love, the kind of love that is earned, nurtured, and lived out over decades. This father stepped into the role when the narrator was just a year old. He didn't just raise him, he loved him through everything, stayed in his life even after divorce, and never wavered. That steadfastness is contrasted with the instability and danger posed by the biological father, who is now deceased, a shadow in the background of the narrator's life. One father gave life, but the other gave love, and the story never loses sight of which one mattered more. There is also the theme of emotional timing. The narrator reflects that had he learned this information during a more vulnerable period of his life, when he was an emotionally sensitive child or dealing with mental health struggles, it could have caused serious harm. This is a deeply mature reflection, as it acknowledges that the truth, while important, must often be balanced with emotional readiness. The narrator is old enough now to process it with compassion and context, but that doesn't erase the initial shock or the psychological disorientation. He is trying to reconcile the version of himself that existed before the revelation with the version that now understands he came from a different source, and that's not a small adjustment. It is, in many ways, a quiet identity crisis. Not the kind that makes someone unravel dramatically, but the kind that keeps you up at night wondering what else you never questioned because you believed in the people who raised you. The way he processes it all, through tears with his dad, through introspection, through reaching out for support, speaks to his emotional depth. He recognizes the burden of this truth and carries it without bitterness. He feels guilt for discovering it, grief for losing part of what he thought made him him, and empathy for both of his parents. He's also aware of the psychological dissonance that can come from learning something that doesn't actually change your present relationships but makes you question everything retroactively. That's perhaps the most haunting part of the story, the realization that the people who love us most can also withhold massive pieces of truth out of fear, and even if they're doing it with good intentions, the truth still hurts when it finally arrives. What's so powerful about this story is that it doesn't end in collapse, it ends in connection. In the final act, the narrator tells his father just how much he means to him. They cry together. That moment of mutual vulnerability doesn't erase the hurt, but it offers a kind of healing that only shared love can. Despite the emotional chaos, there's a quiet, enduring resilience running through this story. It's not a narrative of betrayal or bitterness. It's about surviving a hard truth, grieving what could have been, and learning to cherish what actually is. And in the end, it reinforces something many people hope is true, that love is more powerful than blood. My in-laws helped take our baby for 5 months based on lies, and the system failed us completely. I'm a 26-year-old first-time mom, married to my 25-year-old husband first-time dad, and we have a 17-month-old son. When he was just 8 months old, our entire life flipped upside down. My father-in-law made false claims to DCFS saying we weren't feeding our baby, that we left him crying in his crib all day, and that I was using hard drugs. None of it was true. He barely knew anything about our day-to-day life, and yet he said these things with confidence because he was angry that we didn't want his involvement. My husband and his father have a very complicated past. It wasn't just my decision. To make things worse, my mother-in-law works for DCFS in another state and she backed him up. She added to the lies and helped him get the attention of DCFS in Washington. I truly believe her position made them take it more seriously. It didn't matter that there was no evidence. They still took our baby. He was placed directly with my father-in-law for 5 months. 5 entire months of our son's life, gone. We missed crawling, first words, his first birthday, everything. During that time we were treated like criminals. We fought like hell to get him back, and even now we're left with captive charges tied to our names like we actually hurt our child, which we never did. The only reason DCFS gave for removing him was low weight gain. They never once ordered an allergy test. They never once considered a medical issue. No one, not his foster guardian, not his doctor at the time, not a single caseworker, thought to question what he was being fed. When we finally got him back at 13 months old, I immediately asked for an allergy test. That's when we found out he's allergic to milk. He had been fed milk-based formula his whole life and actual milk once he turned 1. His body could not tolerate it. That's why he wasn't gaining weight. That's why he was so small. It wasn't abuse. It was a medical issue. And nobody figured it out but us. So yeah, I'm angry. I'm furious. The people who were supposed to protect us failed us completely. I'm angry at my in-laws for lying and manipulating. I'm angry at DCFS for believing them with no real proof. And I'm angry that we were the ones who had to figure out what was wrong after being treated like monsters. We're new parents. We took him to all his regular appointments. DCFS wouldn't leave us alone, but none of the doctors ever raised concern. They said we were doing fine. We never even thought to question it until we got him back. Now my husband's family acts like we're being dramatic for cutting them off. Like we're just holding a grudge and being emotional. But how are we supposed to move on from this? With these charges still on our names, we are literally moving across the country just to escape what happened here. And DCFS never even said sorry. The charges just stick like nothing ever changed. Even after the allergy test proved everything. I don't even care if anyone says anything. I just had to say it out loud. I will never forgive them. And I will never forget. Thanks for reading if you got this far. Let me analyze this story for you. This story is a harrowing and deeply emotional account of a young family torn apart by betrayal, institutional failure, and the horrifying consequences of unchecked power within the child welfare system. At its core, it's not just a story about a misdiagnosed allergy or a custody dispute, it's about how easily the system can be manipulated, how slowly it moves to self-correct, and how profoundly damaging that failure can be to the innocent. The narrator, a 26-year-old first-time mother, and her 25-year-old husband found themselves at the epicenter of a nightmare when their 8-month-old son was forcibly removed from their home due to false allegations made by the husband's own father. These weren't vague concerns or misunderstandings. They were calculated lies, accusations of neglect, hard drug use, and emotional cruelty. The betrayal stings even deeper when we learn that the father-in-law's partner, the narrator's mother-in-law, works for DCFS in another state and used her professional position to validate those lies. That detail isn't just chilling, it's infuriating. It reveals how the very institutions meant to protect children can be weaponized by insiders for personal gain or vengeance. From there, the story becomes a tragedy of lost time. Their baby was placed with the very person who made the false report. 5 months, nearly a third of their child's life at that point, passed without them. The trauma is hard to overstate. First words, first birthday, milestones most parents cling to as treasures were stripped from them without a legitimate cause. And all the while, they were treated like criminals, burdened with CAPTA, Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, charges that suggest abuse or endangerment, even as no concrete evidence of mistreatment emerged. The most heartbreaking part of the story, and the sharpest indictment of the system, comes later. After they regained custody at 13 months, it took the parents themselves, not the state, not the doctors, not the foster guardian, to push for an allergy test. And there it was, a milk allergy. Something treatable. Something diagnosable. Something that, if checked for early, could have spared this entire tragedy. The low weight gain that DCFS cited as grounds for removal was a medical issue, not a parental failure. But no one in a position of authority cared to look past the surface. They accepted the narrative of harm without questioning the biology of a child who wasn't thriving because his body was rejecting the very food they were giving him. This sequence of events exposes a grim truth: the system failed not just because it made a mistake, but because it refused to seek alternative explanations. It allowed personal vendettas and institutional laziness to override fairness and due process. And then, when the truth surfaced, it offered no apology, no corrective action, just silence and a record that still follows the parents like a shadow. The psychological fallout is clear and raw. The narrator is not just angry, she's grieving. Grieving lost time, lost trust, and a lost sense of safety. Her anger isn't petty or reactionary. It's the righteous fury of someone who was gaslit, punished, and then abandoned by a system she was told to trust. The impact is long-lasting. They are literally relocating across the country, not for opportunity or family, but to escape a stigma that should never have existed. This is trauma in motion, the kind that doesn't just scar, but reshapes lives entirely. Adding insult to injury is the way the husband's family now minimizes what happened. They accused the couple of holding a grudge, suggesting that emotional abuse, legal persecution, and the loss of their child for months is something they should just get over. This kind of gaslighting, reframing justified anger as immaturity, is often how abusers and enablers avoid accountability. It's not only dismissive, it's psychologically damaging. It reinforces the narrative that the parents were overreacting, when in fact they were navigating the aftermath of a system-backed betrayal. At its heart, this story is a case study in how personal manipulation can collide with systemic failure, creating a perfect storm where the innocent suffer, the guilty go unchecked, and healing comes only from within. The narrator never asks for pity, just acknowledgement. Just a space to be heard, to declare that something profoundly wrong was done to them, and that they will never forget it. And they shouldn't. Because forgetting would mean letting a broken system off the hook, and letting those who weaponized it walk away blameless. This story echoes louder than its specific circumstances. It speaks for countless other families who have been pulled into the machinery of child protective services on weak or false pretenses, families who are often too scared or too silenced to share what happened. In telling her story, this mother not only processes her own pain, she shines a light on the very real flaws in how institutions investigate, act, and repair. And that makes it not just personal, but powerful. I have a hard time knowing if I'm ungrateful or my parents are bad/abusive. I'm currently 16 and this is my first Reddit post I've ever made. It is almost 4 a.m. but I've been hesitant on writing this since 2 a.m. Last summer when one of my friends opened up to me about his past, he wanted to know about my past too, and that really got me thinking really hard. I knew I had stuff happen to me, but if I could ever consider myself as a victim of any kind. I'm not really sure how to start, but I'll try my best on remembering of my earliest memory. When I was in kindergarten, I was an only child and mom would drop me off to a babysitter for maybe 2 years I think. But suddenly we had someone who started to live with us, and it turns out to be my older sister that I never knew about since no one really told me. From then on my sister would be the one to take care of me while my parents are off to work. I like my sister and she was one of the reason why I became an artist, because she taught me. She even taught how to do math better and faster, and we would go out a lot, but exactly when or how, but slowly my mom would start yelling and hitting my sister with a stick or even just her hand for not doing house chores good enough. We would also sometimes be at my parents' workplace too, and I would see and hear mom yelling at my sister to help her in the kitchen. Both my parents are working in a restaurant, while mom would tell me to be out and inform her if there were any customers, and I would listen and did just that. From there on out all I would see is my mom just yelling, screaming, and hitting my sister over minor stuff. Both my parents are strict about us being in relationships, so when my mom found out that my sister was secretly dating someone, she instantly took her tablet, went to her Instagram and made a post and pretended to be my sister, wrote something about how much she's a slut, a whore, and a bad kid and stuff like that. I sat beside my mom while she wrote it and watched her do it. I did ask why she did it, and she told me that because my sister is a bad kid. Dad didn't really did anything about any of this. I don't remember what he was doing while all of this was happening, but I do remember both my parents would argue about my dad's alcohol and smoke addiction. It got too bad to the point I was both of them getting physical and eventually mom calling the police on him. Luckily nothing bad happened to dad, I think. Around when I was 9, my sister just couldn't take it anymore and made a decision on running away from home. I was absolutely crushed and begged her to stay, even tried making any excuses for her to not leave, but she made up her mind and told me to not tell anyone. Sorry I didn't listen. Around evening when mom and dad haven't come home from work yet, she told me her last goodbye and hug and left. I would go to our room and cry until my parents came home and noticed I didn't came to greet them. Dad would ask if I was okay, but I pretended like I was fine and then passed out from exhaustion after crying all evening. From then on everything was pretty blurry. I would be at my parents' workplace at the weekends because mom didn't have anyone to look after me anymore. And I would look out for customers, like when she asked me and dad would ask me to wipe down the tables, and I would do just that. Because it has been a while now since my sister ran away, I would naturally start wanting to spend time with my parents. And would dad ask to come to the nearby mall to hang out, he did agree, but only to go back to work after 20 minutes of being there. Whenever I asked mom to play with me, she would always say that she's busy, so I eventually gave up on asking her and also slowly stopped asking dad too. Being in that workplace was absolutely depressing to me. I would spend my time wandering around alone. It felt incredibly lonely. I would also sometimes ask my mom to buy me a toy or something, and she would either say no, saying it's too expensive, or say that she'll buy it tomorrow, which she never did, and I slowly stopped asking her for stuff without feeling bad about wasting money. At home it wasn't much better. Ever since my sister left, I found myself playing alone much more often. I did ask my dad to play, but I got told to ask mom instead, and I did just that. I then went to my mom to play, but she told me to ask dad instead, but still get turned down by him. Even on his off day, he would still turn me down when I asked him to play while he was laying on the couch watching TV. There were times when he did agree, but only when mom nagged him to play with me. Sometimes when mom was talking to her friends, she would always compare me and my sister, saying how bad of a kid she was compared to me, who's more obedient, saying how bad of an influence my sister was to me. Eventually my parents lost their jobs, and while my mom was searching for a place to work at, my dad was pretty relaxed about the whole situation. Even went to gamble with his friends and get drunk, which only led to more arguing after he got back. At 10 years old, we then moved out because of my parents' work, and things were rough at first. My parents would still argue about my dad's alcoholism and smoking, and I would mainly hear them downstairs. Sometimes even about dad's gambling with his friends and arguing about financial issues. He even went and choked her right next to me. And both also did threat on getting a divorce. There were still times where I want my dad to play with me despite being turned down a ton in the past, but I tried again and got turned down again, and he only agreed after I complained to mom and she nagged him to. But one specific night I asked to play a card game with me just to get turned down while he was laying on the bed watching TV, and that was the moment I gave up asking him to play completely and played the card game alone with my plushies while crying in silence. I remember my mom used to comfort me when I was crying, but she quickly got mad and annoyed at me for crying and would yell at me to stop or say, "What are you crying for?" in an annoyed tone. That led to hold back my tears whenever she's in the same room, and made me hate crying and for being a crybaby. I got teased for being a crybaby too in the past, and I hated it too. Even to this day I absolutely hate crying around anyone or in public and would only do it when I'm completely alone. Dad didn't even do anything nor comforted me when he saw Mom telling me to stop it. At that age my mom wanted me to help her at work again, just like in the past. At first I wasn't against it and did just that, but slowly and surely I started to dislike it because I wanted to do more than just looking for customers, but she refused. But at least I'll get money out of it. I never really got an allowance growing up, so this was my only way of getting money. After a few years of helping her at work I started to just stop going there and helping her because of how much I hate being there. And after a while of not helping she would eventually start calling me lazy and a bad kid for not helping her at work. And that was also the time where I started to stop doing like family activities and stuff like playing board or cards game and whatnot with both of them. I realized that for Dad, TV is much more important, and for Mom, she's too tired from work to play with me, with also led me to not ask them for help either. Mom would say she's either too busy or tired and Dad is too incompetent without Mom. That went on for 2 years until I asked Mom to apply me for guitar and piano lesson, which she agreed, and about 2 years later, I started to get bored of it and asked Mom if I can quit, which in reply she called me lazy. I tried talking to her multiple times and got called lazy every single time, so I stopped trying to communicate with her. Fast forward to now. I have completely stopped helping her at her workplace because it reminded me of the old place way too much and I hated how depressing and lonely it is. And also because it made me realize that most if not all of my memories where I spend time with my parents are at their workplace, which made me hate it even more because it wasn't even spending time with them, it was just about work and customers. I don't talk to my dad anymore and have been really cold to him. To this day he won't have a short talk with me because he's top focus on TV. Mom is still tired and busy from work, so I don't spend time with her either because it's useless if I'm going to get turned down over and over again. I feel absolutely numb, irritated and annoyed whenever I'm talking to them or even just being in the same room as them. Last year Mom complimented one of my friends for having the ability of cooking for himself, and that made me think that I am absolutely useless. I can't cook nor do laundry because I had no one to teach me anything at all. Mom's too busy and Dad's too focused on TV. I did ask Mom to teach me how to cook, but she replied she's too busy with work like every single time. She still calls me lazy for not helping her at work and asked me, "Don't you feel bad for me?" Which I didn't reply because it's hard for me to feel bad for her. I might just be petty or spoiled, but I really cannot feel bad for her because a part of me still holds the grudge that she's the reason my sister left. I remember one day having a panic attack over going to help her at work because she called me to go and help BR because there's a lot of customers. I got ready but started to get too anxious and scared, so I just sat on the floor in front of my door, crying. After a bit she came upstairs and called me a bad kid and lazy for not helping her and said that if she says to go help her then I have to go, so after I calmed down I told her I'll go tomorrow. That happened I think last summer. This year I don't know why, but she started to force me to go to school no matter what, even if I'm sick. She already did that in the past, but only with my music lesson, but never like this. She scolded me for staying home from school just because I was sick and told me that she still goes to work whether she's ill or feeling bad, like physically. Extra thing, but it if this normal parenting, but whenever I ask for something, anything, whether it's money or SMTH as simple as chopsticks or a bowl, I always have to say why I need it for. I get asking why I need money, but I don't really understand why she need to know why I need the bowl for. Lately it starts to piss me off whenever she asks, but I can never let her know or show it. But even after that I can't help but feel like I'm villainizing her because she does provide me clothes and cooks me food and cleans and checks up on me after work to make sure I'm not hungry or anything, and I do have a doctor to make sure I'm healthy. And she gives me my meds every day for me to get better physically. One day my doctor did tell her to get me a psychologist because of how little I was eating. Long story short, I don't have a psychologist, because she didn't believe there's anything wrong with me in the head. Also there's less arguing how, but Dad is still drinking behind her back and smoking, but Mom got too sick of arguing about the same thing, so she just played dumb. But in the other hand she did all of those stuff in the past and it affected me a lot even to this day. Like I can't even buy anything without asking her, but even if she did say yes I start to doubt whether or not I actually want it without feeling like I'm wasting money on something useless. I also started to realize I need glasses. I'm too scared to ask her if I can have an eye doctor for my prescription and stuff because I don't want to be blamed for being on the phone too much while staying in the dark all day in my room. The really only thing I'm not guilty for buying without asking her foods and drinks really, because I know she wouldn't mind. That's probably about it. I'm not sure if talking about this made me feel better or worse, probably worse because I still feel like I'm blaming her too much and I'm just being ungrateful while she's trying her best to support the family and that she wants the best for me. Some of the stuff I wrote here is probably useless. It's pretty hard piecing the stuff happening together from the past because I don't remember anything in between that happened and the timelines that well. Thank you for your time reading this. Let me analyze this story for you. This is a profoundly raw and heartbreaking account of a young person trying to make sense of their upbringing, torn between feelings of guilt and deep emotional neglect. At just 16, the narrator is already carrying the kind of weight most adults spend years in therapy trying to unpack. What makes this story so difficult and so important is its honesty. It captures a universal conflict many children of dysfunctional or emotionally unavailable families face. Am I ungrateful for hurting? Or did they really hurt me? The story begins in confusion, not because the narrator isn't smart or observant, but because their childhood has been full of contradictions. On one hand, their mother provides basic needs, food, clothing, medication, and occasional check-ins. On the other hand, emotionally and mentally, the narrator has spent most of their life alone, invalidated, and feeling like a burden. That dissonance is exactly what makes this story so heavy. It's not physical abuse in the traditional sense, though there are instances of violence. It's emotional neglect, invalidation, manipulation, and a deeply ingrained pattern of dismissing feelings, needs, and the right to be a child. From a very young age, the narrator was forced into a role of emotional labor and self-sufficiency. They watched their mother verbally and physically abuse their sister, even go so far as to impersonate her online and publicly humiliate her, something the narrator witnessed firsthand. The sister's eventual decision to run away is a pivotal moment in the story. The narrator doesn't just lose a sibling, they lose their closest companion, their emotional anchor, and the only person who seemed to treat them with warmth. It's clear that the narrator was traumatized by this abandonment, even if they intellectually understood why she left. What they were left with afterward was isolation, emotional hunger, and a pair of parents who either couldn't or wouldn't be emotionally available. Their father is largely absent, not physically, but emotionally. He turns down their attempts to connect, even when they're desperate for affection. The image of a young child begging to play a simple card game and ending up in tears playing alone with plushies is devastating. It's not just rejection, it's an emotional wound that teaches the child that their needs, their joy, and their pain don't matter. Over time, those messages build up into internalized beliefs like, I'm annoying, I'm not worth time, I shouldn't ask for anything, and eventually, I'm ungrateful for even feeling sad about this. The mother's behavior is even more complicated. While she works hard and fulfills basic responsibilities, her approach to parenting is controlling, invalidating, and often cruel. She shames the narrator for crying, calling them lazy or selfish for expressing distress. She forces them to go to school sick, dismisses clear signs of anxiety and emotional breakdowns, and actively avoids addressing the narrator's mental health despite a doctor's recommendation. When she asks things like, "Don't you feel bad for me?" she's not just being manipulative, she's reversing roles. That's called parentification, where the child is expected to emotionally support the parent, instead of the other way around. It's an incredibly damaging dynamic because it makes the child feel guilty for having needs and feelings. The guilt the narrator expresses, worrying about being spoiled or ungrateful, is a direct result of this kind of parenting. They've been trained to believe that love is transactional. If she feeds me and gives me clothes, I owe her my silence. I owe her my pain. But the truth is, basic care is not the same as emotional care. Feeding a child doesn't excuse humiliating them. Giving medicine doesn't negate years of neglect. A parent is supposed to do more than just keep you alive, they are supposed to love you, guide you, comfort you, and see you. The narrator has learned not to ask for help, not to cry in front of others, not to take up space. Even simple needs, like asking for a bowl or admitting they need glasses, are laced with shame. That's not because the narrator is dramatic or ungrateful. It's because they've lived in an environment where every request is questioned, every emotion is punished, and where survival depends on staying small, quiet, and obedient. What makes this even more painful is the narrator's awareness of how much they've internalized these patterns. They recognize that they feel numb, irritated, and detached from their parents. That they don't speak to their father anymore. That their attempts to connect over the years were met with such consistent rejection that they gave up trying. And yet, they still wonder, is this my fault? Am I a bad kid for feeling this way? The answer, unequivocally, is no. This is not the story of an ungrateful child. This is the story of a teenager who has been emotionally neglected for years, gaslit into believing their pain is selfish, and forced to carry the emotional debris of a family who never made space for their humanity. The parents in this story aren't monsters, but they have failed, in serious ways. The dad, through passivity and absence. The mom, through emotional manipulation, denial, and control. The system around them, doctors, school, family, also seems to have failed to notice how much this child has been silently enduring. The fact that the narrator is questioning all of this, and even willing to write it out and share it, speaks to how deeply they want to understand themselves and how much they deserve better. Key themes. Parentification and emotional neglect. The narrator is expected to suppress their needs in favor of supporting their mother or avoiding conflict. Invalidation and shame. Feelings are dismissed or punished, leading to internalized guilt and shame about having emotional responses. Abandonment and rejection. Repeated attempts to connect with their father are met with rejection, creating lasting emotional wounds. Suppressed identity. The narrator struggles with whether they're allowed to feel hurt, or if doing so makes them ungrateful, a common result of emotional abuse. Resilience. Despite all of this, the narrator is still reflective, thoughtful, and deeply empathetic, a testament to their strength. If you're reading this and relating to any part of it, know this: your pain is real. Your experiences are valid. You are not too sensitive, too selfish, or too dramatic. Wanting to feel loved, seen, and supported is not a weakness. It's human. You are allowed to talk about your story. You are allowed to cry. And you are allowed to begin healing on your terms. I was institutionalized at 12 and now I don't even feel human anymore. When I was 12, my adoptive family had me committed to a psychiatric hospital, and I was in the system until I turned 18. Even then I was on medication and had mandatory therapy until around 23. I won't lie, I had mental issues from early childhood trauma from my birth family, but my adoptive family also harmed me as well. I needed help, but not like that. I spent the next 7 years moving through different levels of care and security, from locked psychiatric wards, secure behavioral centers, not sure what else to call them, and even one time a minimal restrictive home which felt more like a dorm but with more rules. But the early child trauma, which resulted in me going to the ER countless times and nearly dying on many occasions, gave me PTSD and several issues. The doctors were quick to change my meds to see what would work, and unfortunately I had several psychotic breaks and relapses from reality. At this point there are large chunks of my childhood I can't remember or have suppressed. When I finally became free of the system and rejoined society on my own, I felt like an alien. I never attended high school, got my degree from credits and classes in locked facilities. Some places wouldn't let us watch the news and we had limited access to the outside world, so I feel like I missed out on so much. To this day people will make comments about things and I won't get the reference. I also acknowledge that while I was socially distant before, after being in places with suicides, fights, mental breakdowns and me being severely underweight, I kept my distance for my own safety. I'm in my 30s and I just don't understand people. I can laugh and smile, but most times I feel empty. Not depressed, I felt that before and this is not that. I just feel a void. I wake up, go to work, get home and relax. I don't want to be around people because I do understand them. I don't get the need to talk, or connect, or even find a partner. I confess I haven't had any kind of romantic or sexual interaction in nearly 12 years. I find others attractive but have no desire to interact with them. I honestly don't have any desire to find a partner or have children. To be clear, I'm not depressed or not interested in life. I just don't understand and wish to stay away from all others. Let me analyze this story for you. This is a deeply moving and quietly devastating story, one that reveals the long-term emotional, psychological, and social cost of being institutionalized as a child. Beneath the calm, measured tone is a life marked by systemic failure, personal resilience, and a haunting sense of disconnection from the world. The narrator, now in their 30s, presents their story not with self-pity or dramatics, but with a kind of worn-out clarity, the voice of someone who has long since accepted their isolation, not as a tragic flaw, but as a protective adaptation. The story begins with a crucial, painful event. The narrator was institutionalized at 12 years old by their adoptive family. This immediately signals a double-layered trauma, not only the psychological harm from early childhood and biological family, but betrayal and abandonment by the very people who were supposed to offer safety and healing. While the narrator admits they needed help, they also make it heartbreakingly clear that what they received was not care, it was containment. The next 7 years are described in clinical, almost mechanical terms: locked psychiatric wards, secure behavioral centers, minimal restrictive home. These phrases aren't just descriptions, they're echoes of a system that prioritizes structure over humanity. And yet, between the lines, you can feel what these years took from the narrator. They lost their adolescence, their schooling, their exposure to everyday life. They were medicated heavily, shifted from place to place, and subjected to conditions that included violence, suicide, mental collapse, and physical deterioration, all at a time when a child's sense of identity is still forming. Perhaps most tragic is the sense of dissociation that sets in. The narrator alludes to large chunks of childhood being suppressed or forgotten. This isn't just memory loss, it's self-erasure. Trauma, especially repeated trauma during childhood, often leads to this kind of psychic numbing. The brain learns to shut doors to survive. But in doing so, it also shuts out the development of selfhood, connection, and emotional continuity. When the narrator finally rejoined society, it wasn't a triumphant return. It was disorientation. They didn't go to high school. They didn't grow up watching the same shows, participating in the same cultural rituals, or forming the social muscle memory that bonds people together. Even now, in daily life, they feel alienated by references and rhythms they can't relate to. That kind of cultural isolation adds another layer to the loneliness. It's not just that you are alone, it's that you feel like a foreigner in your own country, out of step with the world around you. Socially, the narrator says they keep their distance for safety, a habit formed in high-risk environments where closeness could mean emotional or physical harm. This is a trauma response, but it's also something more permanent now, a part of their identity. They don't express bitterness about this fact. There's no sense of, I wish I could be different. Instead, there's a quiet acceptance, I don't understand people, and I'm okay with that. This leads to the most striking part of the story, the void. The narrator doesn't describe themselves as depressed, and that distinction is important. They're not hopeless or despondent. They don't want to die. But they don't feel much of anything, either. They've described a life reduced to function, wake up, work, rest. There's no desire for connection, romance, or family. They acknowledge finding people attractive, but with zero emotional or physical interest in acting on it. This isn't simply loneliness. It's emotional detachment, the legacy of prolonged trauma, disconnection, and institutionalization. It's not about a lack of feeling in the moment. It's about the inability to form or sustain the wiring that makes connection feel natural or desirable. What's remarkable here is that the narrator doesn't ask for pity. They're not looking for rescue. They're not even asking if something's wrong. They're simply observing themselves as if from a distance and trying to understand what they've become. There's no blame, no melodrama. Just a quiet, exhausted question underneath it all, am I even human anymore? To that, the answer is yes, unequivocally yes. What this person is experiencing is a profoundly human response to profoundly dehumanizing experiences. When you grow up in an environment where survival takes precedence over self-expression, and then spend your formative years in facilities that prioritize control over connection, your brain rewires itself to protect you. Emotional distance, detachment, lack of desire for intimacy, these are not personality defects. They are defense mechanisms that worked. But the cost is enormous. And part of the tragedy here is that the narrator has survived, but not truly lived. They become fluent in survival but not in emotional safety. Not in trust. Not in intimacy. Key themes. Institutional trauma. The narrator's formative years were spent in environments focused on medication, containment, and compliance, not healing. That environment stunted emotional development and social integration. Emotional detachment. The narrator doesn't feel depressed, but they also don't feel connected. The void they describe isn't emptiness from grief, it's numbness from adaptation. Social isolation. Years spent in psychiatric systems rob the narrator of cultural and developmental milestones. They feel out of sync with society and have little interest in bonding with others. Quiet resilience. Despite everything, the narrator is functioning, stable, reflective. They are alive, they work, they show self-awareness, all signs of deep strength, even if they don't feel emotionally engaged. Ambivalence toward humanity. Perhaps the most haunting part of this story is the narrator's alienation not just from others, but from the very concept of humanity. They're not angry. Just separate. This is not a story of failure. It's a story of survival in a system that never once made space for gentleness or joy. The narrator isn't broken, they're unfinished, emotionally paused at the moment life stopped giving them a chance to grow. And that doesn't mean they can't grow now. But it does mean that it will take time, patience, and probably the kind of safe, consistent emotional relationship they've never had.